All right, if you're gearing up for your CSS or PMS exams, you know Rousseau is a name you absolutely have to master. His ideas are foundational, but let's be honest, they can be a little tricky. So in this explainer, we're going to break down his masterpiece, the social contract, in a way that's not just clear, but that's actually going to stick with you when you're in that exam hall.
Right out of the gate, Rousseau hits us with one of the most powerful lines in all of political philosophy. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just a clever phrase, it's the central puzzle that drove his entire life's work. How in the world did this happen? How did we start out free and end up shackled? That's the core question we're setting out to answer.
Okay, so here's our game plan for unpacking all this. First, we'll dig into that core paradox of being born free but living in chains. Then, we'll look at his diagnosis of the problem, the downfall of natural man. After that, we'll get to his proposed cure, the social contract itself. From there, we'll zero in on his most famous and crucial concept, the general will. And to wrap it all up, we'll connect it to what it all means for you as a future public servant. Let's dive in.
So let's really get into that explosive opening line. Man is born free, yet he finds himself in chains. For Rousseau, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical thought. It was the fundamental, tragic problem of modern society. And honestly, it's the key that unlocks everything else he ever wrote.
You have to imagine Rousseau looking around at the world in the 18th century and just being deeply troubled by what he saw. He believed people were naturally good, but he saw them being twisted and corrupted by the very civilization they had built. This led him to his central, burning question. How did we, a species that started out so pure and free, end up creating societies that poison and imprison us? This question is the engine behind all of his work, especially the social contract. So to figure out how society got so broken, Rousseau knew he had to rewind the tape. Like, all the way back to the beginning. He needed to diagnose the sickness of civilization by first understanding what humanity was like before it all went wrong. And this brings us to his idea of the natural man's downfall. He starts with a thought experiment he calls the state of nature. And right away, this is where he throws a massive curveball compared to other philosophers. For Rousseau, our original state wasn't some brutal free-for-all. No, he pictured us as noble savages, solitary beings, healthy, and driven by two simple instincts, the need for self-preservation and a natural feeling of pity for others. We weren't good or evil yet. We were just natural. Now, this puts him in direct opposition to Thomas Hobbes. And pay attention here because for your exams, this comparison is absolutely golden. While Hobbes saw the state of nature as a war of all against all, making life nasty, brutish, and short, Rousseau saw it as peaceful. So for Hobbes, government is what saves us from our own terrible instincts. But for Rousseau, our instincts were fine. It was society that corrupted us. So, what was the tipping point? Where did everything start to go downhill? Rousseau pinpoints the exact moment with this incredible quote. The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society. That one moment, that one idea, private property, was for Rousseau the original sin of humanity. And that one act, man, it set off this disastrous domino effect. First, private property creates jealousy, competition, and conflict where none existed before. Then comes the really clever part. The rich, who now have stuff to protect, convince the poor to create a state with laws to protect everybody. But it's a scam. It's really about protecting their own new wealth. And the result? The chains get locked in. The state becomes the very tool that makes inequality permanent. Okay, so we've diagnosed the sickness. Society is corrupt. The question is, what's the cure? Is it even possible to create a society that's actually fair and legitimate? For Rousseau, the answer was a huge yes. And his blueprint for how to do it is what we're talking about next, the social contract. Now, it's super important to get this straight. Rousseau isn't describing how governments are. He's laying out a blueprint for how a government could be legit. He genuinely believed you could build a just society, but it meant you had to throw out the old rules and start over with a completely new kind of agreement. And this is where we get to the core of his radical, kind of mind-bending idea. In his social contract, every single person agrees to give up all of their natural rights. But, and here's the brilliant part, you don't give them to a king or a president. You give them to the community as a whole. The logic is fascinating. If you give yourself to everyone, you give yourself to no one in particular. And in exchange for that wild natural freedom, you get something way better,
real civil liberty, protected by the power of the general will.
Okay, I just threw out that term, the general will, and we really need to pause here. This is probably the most important and honestly the most misunderstood part of Rousseau's entire philosophy. If you can master this concept, you can master Rousseau.
So, what on earth is this general will, or volonté générale? Well, to put it simply, it's the collective will of the people when they are all thinking about what's best for the community. It's not about what do I want, it's about answering the question, what is best for us? For Rousseau, this is the only legitimate source of law. Period.
But wait a minute, you might be thinking, how is this general will any different from just adding up everyone's votes? What Rousseau calls the will of all. It's a great question, and it's where a lot of people get confused.
The difference is absolutely crucial. The will of all is just a messy collection of everyone's private selfish interests. It's just a headcount of what individuals want for themselves. The general will, on the other hand, is what happens when people think like citizens. Think of it like this. The will of all is 5 people in a car, all shouting out different places they want to go for dinner. The general will is when they all agree to go to the hospital first because one person is seriously injured. It's focused on the common good, and because of that, Rousseau believed the general will is always right.
So this whole idea of the general will then leads directly into how Rousseau thinks about sovereignty. For him, sovereignty is just the general will put into action. And it has 3 very important features. First, it's inalienable. The people can never give their power away. Second, it's indivisible. You can't split it up between, say, a president and a parliament. And finally, and this was really controversial, it's not representable. Rousseau was all about direct democracy. He believed the moment you elect people to make laws for you, you've given up your freedom.
All right, let's land the plane. We've gone through the problem, the diagnosis, and the cure. Now let's talk about why any of this 18th century thinking still matters so much today, especially for those of you aiming for a career in public service. It might feel like ancient history, but these ideas are everywhere. Seriously, every time you hear someone talk about power to the people, or argue that the public good should come before private profit, or warn that massive inequality is a threat to democracy, that's the ghost of Rousseau talking. His work is still the foundation for so many of our modern debates. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question. A question specifically for you as someone who wants to go into public service. In the real world, with all its messy politics and bureaucracy, how do you actually find and serve that general will, the true common good, when you're working inside the giant, complex machinery